Hello friends, talking today about the 8 limbs of yoga. There are so many different lineages in the yoga tradition, and there was a real evolution that occurred over thousands, if not tens of thousands of years. But Raja Yoga is especially associated with the 8-limbed path of yoga. Raja means royal, and it references our divine birthright, the remembrance of our wholeness, that really the world is your oyster. And if you are balanced, if you are true to yourself, if you remember who you are, that life will unfold in a sacred manner, that you will be able to enjoy the abundance of the material world without being attached to it, that you will have that royal remembrance of the bigger picture. We in the West, with our ideals of democracy, tend to think of the monarchy as something bad, and indeed it did devolve into a very unhealthy way of governance. However, initially, in the beginning, the royal family was the family that represented everybody. It really was meant to be a democratic template. So the idea really in Raja Yoga is that everything belongs to all of us, that we are all part of the royal family. The human family is the royal family. So that's what Raja Yoga means, and people often think that in the West we are working with Hatha Yoga, and I'll go into that another time, but really it's Raja Yoga, except that we've taken the asana branch of the tree, or the limb of the torso, as I'll talk about in a minute, and just focused on that and left out the other 7 limbs. So those limbs could be thought of as the limbs of a tree, the branches of a tree. And that's why I paired this teaching today with the asana practice that's really focusing on tree posture. However, the 8 limbs can also be thought of as the 8 limbs of one of the deities of yoga, Shiva. Shiva is sometimes depicted as having 8 arms, and Shiva is the deity that is associated with yoga specifically. And the idea is, in either case, whether the limbs are attached to a torso or they are branches attached to a tree, that they are all one. Yoga means union, and yoga means balance, right? So a tree that is balanced in terms of the branches balancing on both sides of the tree or all sides of the tree. And the same with our limbs. We want our limbs to help us balance this torso, and for the torso to help us balance the limbs. So it's a constant interaction between the trunk, the torso, and the branches or the limbs. Oftentimes, in traditional yoga teaching, students did not learn the postures until they had learned the ethics. The yamas and the niyamas were considered to be more important than the postures by far. And it would be considered unsafe to practice the postures unless you were also practicing non-harming and discipline and contentment, so that you weren't trying to steal from one part of yourself to give yourself a posture that you weren't really ready for. Purity, saucha, maintaining integrity in the posture, not trying to do too much, aparigraha, non-greed. All of these ethics were essential before beginning a posture practice, and also before beginning a meditation practice. As when one does practice meditation regularly, the ego will arise and there will be a battle, or at least a conflict will occur. And this happens on the mat as well with the postures. And so the two limbs of pratyahara and pranayama are really supportive to calming down the nervous system, calming down the thoughts where the ego tends to live, which is in the thoughts, but the ego can live in the body as well. And that's where we see oftentimes the postures being practiced as a competitive sport rather than their real purpose, which is to allow you to sit upright for a long period of time in meditation. However, we practice each branch thinking about all of the other branches, just as you would if you were in a body or in a tree. It's all one. So even when we're practicing the pranayama practices, we're also practicing pratyahara. In order to focus on the breath, we turn the senses inward. We listen to the breath, we watch the breath with our awareness, we feel the breath with our body, we taste the breath, and we smell the breath. There are many other ways to practice pratyahara as well, and I will offer many of those practices throughout this program. Guided visualization is a wonderful way to practice pratyahara, and we will do just a pratyahara practice several times throughout the program. Pranayama, as I said earlier, is the involution of the senses in many ways. So those two go together very well. And oftentimes meditation is on the breath, so there's where meditation can easily intersect with pranayama. And in order to practice meditation, one has to have the senses turned inward. So we start to see how they all intertwine and intersect, and these 8 limbs really are all one. And perhaps you notice in the asana practice that I teach, there is constant cueing to the breath, constant cueing to pratyahara, and often references to the ethics, the yamas and the niyamas as well. So it's important not to, especially for the asana, to not practice the asana in isolation from the other limbs of yoga.